Are the Vikings finally getting that sweet, sweet national respect? Kind of. Plus, a whole bunch of notes. Justin Jefferson on the way to 2K. Kirk Cousins playing at a playoff level. Harrison Phillips' huge day, and more here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I also want to point you to Amazon Fire Stick or Roku. If you have that, you can find this show by downloading the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. So I don't talk about it a ton because I'm not too into power rankings, but it is notable. We do this at Locked On NFL every week. We do a power ranking segment. I will put them up on the screen right now. If you are watching on YouTube and on audio, I will tell you that the Vikings are currently at number 2 on the Locked On power rankings, just behind the Chiefs. Feels fair to me. In some power rankings, they are number 1, and in some, they still haven't cracked the top 5. So, of course, there's not exactly consensus on this, but suffice it to say that the Vikings are seen as one of the better teams in the league. And that's kind of what I've been preaching after that Bills game. I think that Bills game really showed some stuff. It showed a certain amount of ability to win games in the way that games need to be won in the postseason. You do not get 2-score leads and clean pockets and open receivers in the postseason. You don't get perfectly clean games. You don't get to be ahead of the chains all the time. You don't get to be in perfect situations. You don't get to be in good positions with good angles. They are good. The opponents are in the postseason. And you got to play on the road a lot in the postseason unless you are literally the 1 seed, which, hey, it's not in the cards. But let's say the Vikings don't take that 1 seed. They will have to go to Philadelphia. They might even fall to the 3rd seed if you think that maybe they've got more losses in them than 8-1, right? If you think maybe they'll fall to something like 12-5, they might end up with the 3rd seed. They might have to play 2 road playoff games. That is just life. You don't get the 1 seed every year, right? And if you want to be a Super Bowl winning team, you can either sit there and wait till you're the 1 seed and just decide to only compete once every 20 years, or you can be the kind of team that can beat a good team on the road. We just did that. So I think that should go a long way to a lot of people. But you can still kind of do the lucky thing and say, they were just so lucky that Josh Allen fumbled that snap. You could say that they got lucky because of, this pass interference wasn't called on the Duke Shelley pass breakup at the end of the game. Or, you can kind of do any number of things. And if you really want to detract from the Vikings, you can look toward certain stats like DVOA. So the Vikings are like a middle team in DVOA. They're a middle team in adjusted net yards per attempt, and all of these sort of aggregate measures that are supposed to essentially ask the question, how much do these teams produce and prevent production, and uses that as a way to kind of say, okay, who are the best teams? And the reason the Vikings have a ranking in that statistic that is so incongruous with their record, we're going to get a little mathy here, is essentially because they are not the same team that they were before, especially defensively. If you go to somewhere like RBSDM and you sort out kind of the last couple of weeks, right? Or I think I did since the bye, but if you do the last 4 games or so, that would be Bears, Dolphins, Commanders, Bills, and sort that out and compare it to the first 5 games that the Vikings played. It is night and day, especially defensively. And I think on a more real level, on a more kind of, I'll call it an empiric level, you see the Vikings making mistakes earlier in the year that they didn't make in the last couple of games, that they have sort of stopped making so much. And that has led the Vikings to be a bit better of a team. The team that lost to Philly is way different than the team that beat Buffalo. And I think that the dividends of practice and working harder and getting more chemistry together sort of can be seen by comparing those two games, which are very similar situations. That is probably the trendiest Super Bowl pick, Buffalo versus Philadelphia. They're your Super Bowl contenders. Put Kansas City in there sometimes. Those are your three teams basically in the league right now. And so if you aggregate their entire season, take 5 games of a bad team, 4 games of a good team, average it out, you get an average team, right? That's a little bit of an oversimplification of how that stuff is going, and the effect isn't all that dramatic. There's still definitely problems that the Vikings have to solve before they are, ready to go compete in January. Not disputing that. But the point is, the national perception, which is also like, a little bit recency bias, right? They will probably fall 17 spots if they lose to Dallas, as everybody, goes, aha, I knew it. I knew they were actually frauds and all that stuff. But that take is a lot harder to defend when you have a win like this win against Buffalo on your resume. And I think what's important to understand here is that if you want to define the Vikings, if you want to answer, I think the real underlying question of all of this, which is, can the Vikings win the playoffs, right? Because they're in a position where winning the NFC North is not winning the NFC North is so improbable, it's not even like really worth considering right now. Just like mathematically, right? Like they would have to basically lose out and have the Packers win out. But I think aside for 2 games apiece. But really, what we care about is, once you get into the playoffs, is this a real team, or are they just going to get undone as soon as they come up against a real big boy team, right? And to answer that question, I think the next 8 games will tell you a lot more than the first 9 did. I think the last 4 games tell you a lot more than the first 5 did, because the Vikings were making new to the scheme mistakes. That wasn't going to go on all year, right? And now it's not going on, and so this is going to be a little bit more representative of who they are, if you ask me. But the next 8 games are going to tell you quite a bit. I think this Buffalo game tells you more than any individual game in this season will. So I'm not just trying to say throw away the season, let's start 0-0, although it's always decent advice for the team itself that you always want to be 1-0. That's a good attitude to have, if you ask me. But just the later we get in the season, the closer we will be to the form that the Vikings will be in January, right? And so I think there's a lot of stuff that remains to be seen, and the bad stuff that happened earlier in the year, I just think it's either ignorant or dishonest to define them by that. And that should probably reflect pretty well on them. So I want to get into some more specifics of this, though, right? The way that Kirk Cousins has played in these last couple of games, especially off the bye, has been absolutely fantastic. I am so happy with it, even after you consider like the bad interceptions and a couple bad plays here and there. I'm really happy with what we're getting out of Kirk Cousins. Justin Jefferson on pace for 2K. We'll talk about that, and some stuff on the defense as well. But first, let me talk to you about the world's largest car sharing marketplace. It's Turo. And with Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it. It has a huge selection of vehicles, anything from a big old SUV or a minivan that can fit the whole family to something like a little electric car, or something you're maybe interested in test driving, or just something you need for wherever you are going. And oftentimes, Turo hosts will deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. So forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, covering all sports in a daily show in the format of this one. I would also love it if you checked me out on Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I went over the film for every big moment of this game, all of the big plays, the big Jefferson catch, some big third downs, the 81-yard touchdown, and all of this broken down and analyzed for your viewing pleasure. You can find that on patreon.com. But I do want to just like chit chat about some of those. In particular, what happened after Kirk Cousins sort of turned himself around on this game. There was a very clear turning point. To ask Cousins, it's the 81-yard touchdown. I kind of think there was a play before that was a 3rd and 12 that required Cousins to really think outside the box. And I'm not talking about off script, although there was a play in this game that was a designed screen that got blown up. It was supposed to go to Dalvin Cook, and Dalvin Cook got eaten up in the trenches and couldn't get out to where he was supposed to be. So the screen was totally screwed. 99 times out of 100, you see the quarterback turf that, throw it right at the running back's angles, live to fight another day. And it was 2nd and 10, so you even had a 3rd and 10. To me, the mentality of Kirk Cousins that bothered me so much for all the other years he was a Viking. And that's not even the best example of it, because most quarterbacks will turf that. But the idea of, all right, this isn't perfect. Let's live to fight another day. Let's go to 3rd and 10. That sort of willingness to go to the next down, or willingness to kind of go off to the next thing that might be a little bit safer. Sometimes it felt like he would decline a 40% play only to line up for a 20% 3rd down, right? And in this game, he bailed on it. He didn't turf it. He bailed out of the pocket, and he went into improv scramble mode and found Adam Thielen deep down the sideline for a huge gain. You never see Kirk Cousins do that. And I think that that's truly a different mentality. Call it the quieted mind. I talked about it yesterday. Call it that's Kevin O'Connell doing whatever he told the Wilfs he would do that got him the job. But this is a different Kirk Cousins. And all of the sort of prior the priors biasing me, which I think your priors should bias you. So maybe bias is a bad word, but all of the information coming into this from the last 4 years of watching Kirk Cousins, this is starkly different from it. And I mean, I've said on the show a whole bunch, like, I'm a card carrying Kirk Cousins hater. So from the perspective of a card carrying hater, I hope that gives this a little bit more weight. Kirk Cousins is playing at a playoff caliber level. Screw it, championship caliber level. I earnestly believe that with all of my heart. The kind of quarterback that wins championships in this league, in the NFL, is the kind of quarterback that takes a botched 2nd and 10 screen and turns it into complete in the red zone, 20 yards down the field. That's what you need to do to win championships. And that is the kind of thing that it wasn't that Cousins couldn't do it, it's that he wouldn't. And that screenplay proves so much to me. That gets me so excited. And that's why I'm looking at, DVOA, and I'm looking at, the like EPA composites and stuff, or whatever you have on your power rankings, whatever like metric you want. And I'm just kind of thinking, man, they don't know this is a different Kirk Cousins. And a lot of national media has kind of, I don't think that the Vikings are the most interesting team to them. And sure, whatever, right? Like when you're covering 32 teams, like for me on Locked On NFL, there's absolutely teams that I just like try to avoid talking about because I just don't have the best vibe. I don't really understand the Patriots right now. I haven't really watched much Patriots. I haven't watched much of the Steelers, or like there's other random teams that, especially in the AFC, that I just don't have a great vibe on. And so I'm not going to talk about him much. And if you could say, if you're a Patriots fan, you're saying, man, that guy, that's a national guy. He doesn't even pay attention to the Patriots. It's like fair. And if that's the case with some people in the Vikings, sure, you don't want to watch the Kirk Cousins team. You've been watching Kirk Cousins Vikings teams for 4 years. What new is there to learn, right? But I think they made something new for you to learn. And that screen bail thing is just so improvisational. It's so vintage Aaron Rodgers. It's honestly something Josh Allen would do, something Patrick Mahomes would do. And being able to not only do that, but also find that ball on the run and throw it pretty darn well is pretty insane. Something about that particular play just like clicks with me. But there's other stuff like that. There's a play where he dodges 2 different pass rushers and then zips one over to the sideline. There's one where he can't step into a throw and he has to zip like a 15-yard corner route to the sideline, like from inside the hashes, inside the tackle box that he can't step into. He's getting drilled, and he basically just has to do that on all like torque and arm strength, and he throws it on a dime. Like he throws it as perfectly as you could ever place it. There are so many moments in this game that, and I'm not one of those people that believes that there's a finite amount of good throws in a quarterback's arsenal. I think if you did it once, you can do it again. And if nothing else, it proves to Kirk Cousins that he can do it again. It's something that you can, wake up in the morning, the morning of a game and say, hey, that screen gets borked. I might be able to roll out and make something of this. Or at least roll out, if there's nothing, I can still throw it away, right? There's a mentality to it. And that really, really excites me. I want to get to some other odds and ends and notes, the JJ2K thing, the defense. But first, look, end of the year is coming up. And if you are a small business owner, you might be on that final push, to get to whatever your yearly or your Q4 goal is. You might need a new person. For that, you got to go to LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the best hiring marketplace online. And you can post your job for free with the promo code that or the special URL that I'm going to give you. They have simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster so you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I also want to talk to you about a good old Gramble. BetOnline is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling. We were hawking that betting line for the game last week, but hey, if you believe in the Vikings and you think the Vikings are going to go home, they're going to show Dallas what for, I'm going to tell you right now, the Cowboys are favored. So go slam that line if you want over at betonline.net. And you can find, of course, all NFL games, props. You can bet live right in the middle of games. You can bet on basketball, baseball, just about anything under the sun. That is all at betonline.net, where the game starts. Moving past the Kirk Cousins thing, let's talk about Justin Jefferson. We got to start tracking this JJ2K thing. There is somebody who's been tracking this. He goes by Roundy Mass on both Twitter and Reddit. I am going to put his screenshot up over this. I hope he doesn't mind that I'm showing it, but follow him on Twitter, Roundy_Mass, who has been tracking all year Justin Jefferson's progress to a 2,000-yard season and also comparing it to the best receiving season of all time, which is 2012 Calvin Johnson, and as well as Randy Moss's best receiving season of all time. Calvin Johnson got 1,964 yards. Randy Moss got 1,632. Justin Jefferson is currently on pace for 2,002 yards. That means if he keeps up his average yards per game, which is 117, it would put him ahead of Calvin Johnson by 38 yards, and he'd be way ahead of Randy Moss, and it would put him over that magical 2,000-yard mark. I think 193 was the final total for this one for Justin Jefferson against the Bills. He's also gotten 100 yards, and I think like 5 of the last 6, and the one that he didn't was the 98-yarder. So he is very consistently doing this. The thing about these seasons is it's so hard to keep it up because teams will, if you start having this breakout season, with the year Adam Thielen got all those 100-yard games, I think it was 2018, where he got like 100-yard games, like 8 games in a row. And then teams just started clamping on him and like trying to shut him down. And the Vikings offense, which had lots of problems that year, couldn't really respond. But these kinds of things ebb and flow, right? When you are an opposing team, if you're the Cowboys, you're looking at Justin Jefferson going, my God, he gets 100 yards a game. We got to do something pretty intense about this. So I would actually kind of expect, especially considering the attention that he's gotten and everybody saw the catch, I would expect the Cowboys to do something pretty drastic to stop Justin Jefferson. And I think that game will be a lot about if the Vikings can punish it better than they did when, the Lions or Eagles did stuff like that. So, either way, something to keep an eye on. We can see the first 2,000 yards receiving season right now. We're in November, and he is on pace to do it. This is not like one of those super bad faith hashtag on pace stats. Like I think he was on pace for 3,000 yards if you took that after just week 1 because he got like 180 in that game. It's like, hey, if he gets 180 every game, that's 3,000. but I think he actually has a reasonable shot to hit this 2,000 yards if he can have a couple of really big explosive games to paper over the inevitable times when a defense sells out so hard to stop him that somebody else gets all the targets, which is going to happen. And if he does disappear in a game and you're like, where's Justin Jefferson? It's almost certainly that the defense sold out and that the Vikings have chosen to zig where the defense zags and try to win the game that way. And it's just a matter of if that second plan, if their plan B, plan C can actually work. That is one of the next like things to test. The Bills didn't test it with Justin Jefferson. They had all kinds of secondary issues, and I don't know what really plan you can have, but they did let like Dane Jackson be one-on-one with him a lot. And, they let Teron Johnson take him if he was in the slot. They let Justin Jefferson have his moments. And they did a lot of like cover 2 where there'd be like turkey hole stuff. They'd be in a lot of zone things where he'd be finding holes in the zones. So they didn't do the like just clamp him down and double him all day. I kind of feel like Dallas is going to, just based on the information that Dallas is going to be working with. But I want to talk a little bit about our defense as well, the Vikings defense, which holding Josh Allen to 30 points, including overtime, is something. I will say, I don't think Josh Allen's injury really hampered him all that much. If anything, I would say the wind probably affected some things strategically, but not like so drastically as it did in like the Lambeau game. But it was the same amount of wind. Like the wind speed was the same, but I don't know. Maybe it's the stadium's construction might be a little different than Lambeau. So there's different like physics, but Josh Allen still did all kinds of Josh Allen things. And when you watch that tape, so much of the production, so many of the explosive plays were just like, welp, can't do anything about that. Like just Josh Allen gets pressured, flushes out of the pocket, jukes a defense, he jukes Zadarius Smith. And it's like, well, he'll do that. He's Josh Allen. I'm not too mad at Zadarius Smith for getting juked by one of the most freakish humans ever to touch a football. It's somebody said he's Dante Culpepper. And I actually really like that comp. That's a really good comp. He's like Dante Culpepper, but more accurate, which is crazy because he was super inaccurate coming out. I could gush about Josh Allen all day. He's definitely one of my favorite players in the league right now. But when he does stuff like that, when he really, gets the ball moving down the field, you're like, you're not mad at the defense because he's beating you in ways that nobody else can beat you. And so the defense doesn't have an existential problem to solve. They don't have to play Josh Allen again. If they do, things are going very well. But the one sustainable thing that I guess the defense did let up was a lot of run production on power runs. And there is a very particular thing that I want to get to. But first, I just have to shout out Harrison Phillips. Harrison Phillips is not getting enough love after this game. Zadarius Smith, I think he still leads the league in pressures. Great game. Daniil Hunter, great game. Patrick Peterson, 2 interceptions. Awesome game. Don't need to tell you about that. You know about that. Harrison Phillips needs love. Please watch Harrison Phillips. He was an absolute wrecking ball, and there is an argument to be made that he had the best game of his career in this one. And it's so funny, going back to the way I reacted when the Vikings essentially swapped Michael Pierce for Harrison Phillips for a little cheaper. And I was like, man, I think they got cheaper but worse. And that sucks. I think Harrison Phillips is just outplaying what Michael Pierce would have done here and what he did last year when he was healthy. And he's been healthy, which obviously helps, but it's also more about he's just more disruptive. And that's saying something. Michael Pierce was very disruptive. But I don't know. There's a victory lap for Kwesi, I think, because they got cheaper, and Harrison Phillips is playing at one heck of a level. There are a lot of good noses in the league, so I'm not going to quite say like, Pro Bowl, although I wouldn't complain. It's just such a crowded field. There's just a lot of good D tackles, especially in the NFC, where it's like, okay, one of those spots will always go to Aaron Donald, and it's really hard for like run stuffer nose tackle types to make it there. It's usually going to be the Aaron Donalds and the Fletcher Coxes. But Harrison Phillips deserves recognition just for pushing guys back, for winning one-on-ones against interior linemen, for splitting double teams, for denying reach blocks, for crossing across blockers' faces, forcing running backs to make cuts at inopportune moments. He's just very disruptive, and a lot of the other stats you see elsewhere on the Vikings owe some amount of responsibility to Harrison Phillips. Go Harrison Phillips. So the one one salient football thing I'll leave you with is the way the Bills ran the ball is something I think the Vikings need to work on here. So the Vikings have a run stunt that is one of their favorites. They love to do this on the weak side, especially. That I know it as a scrape exchange, but it's basically a run stunt. The weak side defensive end will crash really hard into the tackle, into the weak side tackle. And if the play is going away from you, going toward the strong side, where a lot of teams like to run, it gives them a head start on like pursuing backside. And if it is a zone run to the other side, this will be like Daniil Hunter. It'll give him a really easy shot to maybe be able to like shoot a gap and penetrate because you're just like stepping the other way, and you might actually be able to flash across an offensive lineman's face and suddenly find yourself in a gap with an opportunity to get into the backfield. And then just so that it doesn't get punished because you're going really far inside, the linebacker outside of you or behind you, so the will linebacker, and that's both Kendricks and Hicks, depending on the alignment, will then kind of loop around and replace you on the outside. So now you are the one responsible for the weak side B gap as the D end, and Kendricks or Hicks will be responsible for the C gap. And you're basically just switching jobs with the linebacker. That is one of their favorite run stunts. If you run power into that, you're playing, now the defensive end is playing directly into the tackle's hand. If you think about like the angles, you are going to the inside of the tackle. And on power, the tackle wants to block to the inside. So you're now playing right into their hands, right? And that makes you a lot less potent of a weapon. And then, especially if it's not to the weak side and they have a tight end there, but otherwise, if they have a guard that's able to climb up to you or something, you'll basically have an unimpeded lineman. That defensive end will not be able to, they're getting down blocked. They're not going to have as good of an angle to prevent a guard from climbing up and hitting that linebacker. So also there's a puller over there. That's the really big problem with power, right? So it's basically you're matching that same sort of crash down, loop around movement on offense, where the tackle will crash down with the end, and then a puller will come and loop around with the linebacker, and now your point of attack matchup is Eric Kendricks versus like a guard with 30 pounds on him, 50 pounds on him, and that's suddenly not a very good matchup. The Bills used this to great effect, and then they just went away from it. So I don't think the Vikings solved that problem. I think the Bills just decided they were going to run more zone. This might have been a halftime adjustment where they thought, I think the Vikings are going to stop doing that run stunt because we were beating it up pretty good. So let's try to kind of catch them. And we're going to change our run too, so that now they've changed to something that's just as ineffective. And then the Vikings didn't change theirs, and the Bills just kind of stopped calling the thing that was doing so well. There's maybe a little chess game there. I'm like totally guessing, but that could be something. Hopefully that made sense visually. You got to visualize it a little bit, and I will explain it on Patreon. So come on over to patreon.com if you need the visual there. It will all be, especially it'll all be open to the public after the Cowboys game. It all will become open to the public. Everything I do about the Bills game will be public a week later. That's how the Patreon is working right now. So come join me there, patreon.com/LukeBraun NFL. Go check out Locked On Sports today. I will see you all tomorrow with Crossover Thursday. And as always, Skol.